Some foods are touted as super healthy when in reality they may have some serious flaws and even contain substances that may be harmful to our health. Are you eating some of these healthy foods? Let's take a look at 5 healthy foods to avoid I want you to know the truth, so I'm here to expose the science and share practical tips on weight loss, fitness and healthy lifestyle. It's simply put, with no BS. Make sure you're subscribed. I'm Ingunn, the Norwegian Viking. Now let's get straight to those 5 healthy foods to avoid. Number 1, soy. Now, soy is often considered to be a great source of protein, but not all protein in soy is useful to us humans. First of all, we humans need a certain ratio of different essential amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein, and soy does not provide that same ratio of amino acids. It has a low amount of methionine as well as lysine, and because of this, a certain amount of the protein is simply not useful to us. On top of this, there are substances within soy that actually inhibit us from absorbing certain amount of the protein. For instance, you have something called tannins, which may reduce protein digestibility, as well as trypsin inhibitors that reduce protein digestibility by inhibiting digestive enzymes. So even though soy may contain more protein than a lot of the plants out there, some of the soy is simply not absorbed, and out of what is absorbed, some of it is not even useful to us. There are also other substances in soy that may not be very beneficial to us. For instance, soy contains something called phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens are said to be a part of the plant's defense mechanism against animals who want to consume them. The idea is that this substance affects the fertility of the animal trying to eat it, so it may even become infertile, so that the animals that try to eat this plant won't come around too often. The plant is trying to defend itself. It may not be a huge effect on us humans, though I personally don't think soy is worth that risk. And then you have something called oxalates. Soy can be very high in oxalates, which can lead to kidney stones. This is how one paper puts it. After oxalate has been absorbed from the diet, it cannot be metabolized and it is excreted by the kidney into urine, where it binds to calcium, forming an insoluble salt that may precipitate to form kidney stones. Ouch! And then you have something called phytates. Their presence may affect bioavailability of minerals, solubility, functionality, and digestibility of proteins and carbohydrates. It's not looking very good for soy. And then you have something called goitrogens, which we'll talk more about with respect to one of the other healthy foods to avoid. Soy also contains something referred to as FODMAPs, which are short-chain carbohydrates that are indigestible to us, though they may ferment in our colon. This fermentation produces gas, so soy can make us bloated and gassy. A lot of soy is also GMO, so if you want to stay away from GMO foods, you might have to be a bit careful with soy. In short, I would say soy does not have a lot of good things going for it, and there are much better ways to get very high quality protein, vitamins and minerals without all those undesirable substances. Now, healthy food to avoid number 2 is vegetable oil. And this is the most important food to avoid on this list, at least in my opinion. Well, together with the next food, which is kind of related. Now, before the 1900s, we basically did not consume vegetable oil. Actually, it shouldn't really be called vegetable oil, it should be called seed oil. Anyway, most people know it as vegetable oil, so I'll keep calling it vegetable oil at least for now. Vegetable oil consumption has skyrocketed throughout the 1900s and up until today, and it is not a natural part of a human's diet. It may possibly even have something to do with skyrocketing rates of chronic disease and obesity. A lot of vegetable oil is highly processed. Let's take a look at the process of making canola oil, for instance. This is from the website of Canola Council of Canada. To make oil, the canola seed is cleaned, heated and flaked, cooked, pressed. They use hexane as a solvent to extract as much oil as possible. It is refined, color pigments are removed. It's a big process to go through. It's highly processed, and I'm not really sure we should be calling it food. Maybe just edible substance? Apart from being highly processed, vegetable oils are very high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs. Our consumption of PUFA has also skyrocketed. It's not natural for humans to eat this much PUFA. And our main source of PUFA is vegetable oil. The more natural fats, and the ones that we used to consume the most before we had vegetable oil, don't have nearly as much PUFA. That's a sign right there. It's not natural. PUFAs are also the most unstable fats, meaning they can more easily oxidize, both while being stored, while being heated, as well as inside our bodies. And it may possibly also lead to oxidized LDL, which may be one of the better indicators of heart disease. I talk more about this in my video about the best and worst fats for cooking, so check it out. I'll link to it in the description of this video. PUFAs may also be one of the main factors related to our obesity epidemic. I'll talk more about that in a different video though. You may also want to check out my video on saturated fat if you're worried about that. Again, vegetable oil is the most important food to avoid on this list, at least in my opinion, together with the next food that we'll talk about shortly. Though vegetable oil is widely used. It's cheap and you can find it in so many packaged foods as well as in restaurants. So whenever you're buying packaged food, just check the label to see what type of fats they might have used. And I think you'll be surprised to find a lot of them, maybe even most of them, if not the great majority, use vegetable oil. Food to avoid number 3 is margarine. Margarine is vegetable oil on steroids. Well, not literally, though it's bad. Regular vegetable oil is a liquid in room temperature because it contains mostly unsaturated fat. Makers of vegetable oil saw that there's a need for things like butter and lard for certain types of cooking and baking because they are solid at room temperature. So they thought they would try to make vegetable oil solid at room temperature by basically converting a certain amount of the unsaturated fat within vegetable oil to become saturated fat, basically by bombarding the vegetable oil with hydrogen. And that's how margarine came to be. However, by doing this, they also created something called trans fats. And it's pretty much agreed now that trans fats are bad for our health. One study found that replacing saturated fat with trans fats lowered HDL, which is usually referred to as the good cholesterol, and impaired artery dilation. Yikes! Because we know trans fats are bad, they have now come up with a different way to make margarine without trans fats, using something called interesterified fats. Basically, they either chemically or enzymatically change the structure of fat molecules so that they change the melting point of the fat, creating fats that are solid at room temperature. Vegetable oil is already highly processed and not natural in a human's diet. And on top of this, we're changing the structure of fat molecules? That does not sound natural and healthy to me, at least. Before we look at healthy food to avoid number 4, please take a moment and click that subscribe button and turn on notifications to be notified when my next video comes out. And also remember to follow me on Instagram at VikingIngunn. Healthy food to avoid number 4 is kale juice. Kale has been called a superfood. It's said to be one of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. It's even said to possibly lower cholesterol. Sounds amazing, right? Well, let's take a closer look. First of all, when it comes to nutrients, it's very important to consider something called bioavailability, which is basically a measure of how much of the nutrients our body can actually absorb. For instance, when it comes to vitamin A, kale doesn't even contain vitamin A, but rather something called beta-carotene, which our body can convert into vitamin A in the body, though that requires more work for the body. And on top of that, less beta-carotene is actually absorbed from food. Kale is also said to be an amazing source of vitamin K. First of all, it only contains vitamin K1, not K2. And K2 seems to have a lot more important functions within our body. And on top of that, as little as 4 to 7% of K1 may actually be absorbed from kale. So really, it may contain a lot of vitamin K1, but whatever we don't absorb is pretty much useless to us, right? Most people ignore this, which is why a lot of people will say that kale is an amazing source of, for instance, vitamin K, but they don't consider bioavailability. Kale is also said to possibly help in lowering cholesterol, which, by the way, is assumed to be a good thing. The reason it's said to possibly help lower cholesterol is because it contains a substances that can bind to bile acid. Now, bile acid is made in the liver using cholesterol and then released into the digestive system to help you digest food. Normally, bile acid does its job and is then reabsorbed further down in the digestive tract to be used again later on. It's like our own recycling system. However, kale disrupts this system by binding to bile acid, making it impossible to reabsorb and reuse the bile acid. That doesn't sound very good, does it? Well, proponents of kale believe it is a good thing because that means our bodies will have to make more bile acid out of cholesterol, and thereby possibly lowering our cholesterol levels. But hey, let's see it for what it is. Kale disrupts a natural working system within our body, making it do more work. How is that a good thing? And note that cholesterol itself is not as good of a predictor for heart disease as we have been told. So even though it might lower cholesterol, it might not have that much value. Kale also contains something called goitrogens, which are substances that interfere with our thyroid function by decreasing the absorption of iodine. Not producing enough thyroid hormones may lead to goiter as well as other health problems. Remember, I mentioned this with regard to soy as well. Also, these substances are believed to be part of what makes these plants taste bitter. Humans don't really like bitter taste, so it's believed that evolutionarily this has helped us by staying away from foods that are not healthy. So with respect to this, it doesn't really sound like a smart thing to force ourselves into eating bitter kale. Kale is also number 3 on the Dirty Dozen list, a list from the Environmental Working Group on the foods with the highest pesticides residues. Now, why do I say kale juice rather than just kale in general? Well, by juicing something, you may end up eating a lot more of the harmful substances. Now, healthy food to avoid number 5 is fake meat. Fake meat or plant-based meat is really something of its own. First of all, just check out the ingredient list of some fake meat. And let's just compare that with the ground beef. Ground beef has one ingredient versus lots of ingredients in fake meat. Some which most people would have no idea what is. Plus, fake meat is highly processed. They use things like pea protein, soy protein, which are meals or powders. It's highly processed. One plant-based meat brand writes on the website that hemi is what makes meat taste like meat. It's an essential molecule found in every living plant and animal, most abundantly in animals, and something we've been eating and craving since the dawn of our humanity. Our plant-based hemi is made via fermentation of genetically engineered yeast. Ooh, sounds great. We started by extracting hemi from the root nodules of soybean plants, but we knew there was a better way. So we took the DNA from these soy plants and inserted it into a genetically engineered yeast. We fermented this yeast to produce hemi. Wow, this is really supposed to be healthy? Fake meat can also be low in saturated fat, which some people would think is a good thing, though again, check out my video specifically about saturated fat if you're one of these people. But that means it may also be high in PUFAs, which we've already talked about may not be a good thing. Plus, as mentioned with regards to soy, plant protein is not the same as animal protein. A certain amount is simply not even absorbed, and even what is absorbed some of it will not really be useful to us. Plus, fake meat may even contain some of the foods that we've already talked about on this list, like soy and vegetable oil. There's lots more to say about this. A lot of nutrients in plants are not as bioavailable to us as they are in animal foods, and some are even non-existent in plants. Now, when it comes to all of these 5 healthy foods to avoid, eating some is probably fine, especially if it's just here and there. Though what we've talked about in this video is definitely something to consider, especially if you're eating these foods on a regular basis. Something to think about. Now, one last note, make sure, if you haven't already, download my free guide called Hack Your Way Out of 3 Weight Loss Mistakes Almost Everyone Makes. If you're looking to lose weight, it's very important to stay away from these common mistakes, as they may slow down and even make losing weight a miserable experience. You can download this free guide right now at vikingingun.com. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please make sure to give it a thumbs up, a heart, or like, depending on where you're watching from, and I'll see you in the next video.